Hi everyone, I'm Sherwood from 𝘃𝗰𝗃𝗁𝗃, where we help public sector organisations to meaningfully involve people and communities in shaping the services that affect them, to make those services fairer and more effective. We're here today to talk about our recent work in partnership with Black Country ICB on young people and vaccinations. Thank you for being here with us and looking forward to the discussion. We're on LinkedIn Live and we're on YouTube Live. If you're on LinkedIn, there's an opportunity to put comments in and we can hopefully see those and we can definitely respond afterwards if we don't get to them during the session. And anything else that you want to pick up on, we always see these things as the start of a conversation. So please feel free to get in touch with us and carry on that conversation. So I'm going to give a bit of context around the work and then move into the main part, which is going to be speaking to Stuart and Rosie, who I'm here with today from 𝘃𝗰𝗃𝗁𝗃. So this work was based in the Black Country. For those of you who are not familiar with the area, it's a richly diverse area of the West Midlands, but with significant levels of deprivation. This project was around working with over 250 young people in this area to understand their experiences of vaccinations and their ideas for how to make them better in the future. We had three aims going into this work. So the first one was to increase vaccine uptake by identifying barriers to being vaccinated and finding opportunities to include more people. The second was to identify and address health inequalities in access to vaccines. Health inequalities is a big focus for 𝘃𝗃𝗃𝗁𝗃, and I think what we're especially interested in is really getting into the specifics, so being able to go beyond saying this group of people are more likely to get vaccinated than this group of people, and really understand what's the difference in access to information, ability to process that information, experience when we get involved in services, those kind of things, because those are the things that really allow us to make change. And the third is around developing a process for involving young people in public health challenges. Because for us, this process, the actually involving people, can create as much good sometimes as the outputs from that process. So I think especially when we're working with young people, providing this opportunity for people to be listened to, for their experience to be heard, and to start thinking of themselves as agents in the services of the future. What have you learned? What could be different? How could things be different in the future? Is a way to develop more active patients and more active citizens for the future. So this work was funded by NHS England, and it aimed to go beyond just consulting young people to working with them, alongside them, as the experts on their own experiences. So I'm here today with two of our brilliant associates, Stuart and Rosie, who led on this project. We'll be talking about how it went, what we learned, and what it might mean for anyone who wants to do more meaningful involvement in their work, especially with young people and especially in public health. So before we go further, just want to hand over to Stuart and Rosie to introduce yourselves. So Stuart.
Yeah, thanks, Danny, and thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. My name is Stuart Dodzo, and I'm an associate at 𝘃𝗃𝗃𝗁𝗃. I come in with a background in young people engagement within communities, NHS, CQC, and also with academic settings, so universities. And I bring my lived experience as well within the work that I do. And so co-production is one of my sort of biggest passions within sort of the health and social care services.
Brilliant. Hi, everyone. I'm Rosie Ayub. So I'm an associate also with 𝘃𝗃𝗃𝗁𝗃. And most of my work over the last 30 years has been around engagement, facilitation, co-production. So I'm just really passionate about creating spaces where people can have their voices heard and where we can work together developing solutions to improve services. So much of my work really focuses on, and what I love to use, are very creative and participatory approaches to engagement. And we got to use some of those approaches in this project. So yeah, that was great. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you both. So the main part of today is going to be hearing from Stuart and Rosie. Just wanted to give you a little bit more context before we jump in. So when Co-Create take on a project like this, we don't have a preset way to approach it. We've got lots of approaches and methods that we've tried before, and we try and work out together and with the people we're working with the best way to approach the specific questions we're asking, especially thinking about where we are, resources we have, the people we're working with, what we want to find out. So Janet Cairns and the team at Black Country ICB were brilliant in terms of being open to this way of working and to come along on a journey with this really and find out what we were going to find out, because we don't really know when we start this kind of work what's going to happen, what we're going to hear, whether it's going to answer directly the questions that we came in with, or whether we're going to find out that they weren't quite the right questions. And that can be a challenge for more traditional approaches to commissioning and to engagement. So it's been really nice to work with a team who are really open to coming along with us on that. So we agreed we'd begin this work with health and social care students in colleges across the Black Country. So that's what we'll be talking about today. Just wanted to highlight that we'll be talking about young people and vaccinations. That's how the reports are titled, for example. But it feels important just to be transparent about, we've spoken to 16 to 18-year-olds who are studying health and social care at the moment. Now, my expectation is that a lot of what we've learned will apply to young people of other ages in other contexts, but we can't say that for sure. That's not what we've learned. So when we're talking about young people in this context, it is a shorthand, and there's really this more limited set of people we've worked with. Now, that's always the case with involvement. It's just, I think what's really important to us is just to be very clear and open about who we have included and who we haven't been able to include and intend to include in the future. So finally, before we jump in, just wanted to mention that there are two written outputs to the work that we've done. So there's an insights report, and that's maybe the more traditional one. It has the methodology, it has what we've learned, it has the improvement ideas that young people came up with. We also have a toolkit, and the toolkit is a set of service improvement ideas. Now, this is all the work that the young people did with us. So this isn't about us saying, we've seen the services and this is what you need to change. This has all come from them, from their experience, thinking through how things should be better. So you can find those on our website. And for those of you who are here on LinkedIn today, I also have a contact. So be sharing the recording and the reports afterwards. But for now, going to jump into the conversation. So the starting point, I'd like to ask Stuart first, what made you want to do this piece of work?
So for me, professionally, because I've spent the past 6 to 8 years working in young people involvement, so this was an opportunity to try out different involvement techniques or practical skills around engagement of young people within a school setting, so an academic setting, because usually, I think traditionally, involvement has been in youth centers. It's been in outside of sort of a setting which is as formal as a school. So for me, this was a professional challenge. However, personally, as I mentioned, I've got lived experience. I wanted to do this because I'm aware of being a young person who was accessing services myself, and I've been felt excluded from conversations. So not being asked how I felt, asked how I thought about a process or how I could improve a process. And then also young people from my work with young people often get brought into the conversations quite later on, into service development or service improvement. So the ship has already sailed, and then we get young people to come in to just tick a box on what we've done. So this was an opportunity to get into the schools, to speak to the students directly alongside the students in their classrooms. I haven't been in a classroom in years, by the way, before doing this work. So that was my motivation around getting involved in this.
Brilliant, thank you. And Rosie?
Yeah, I think my first feeling was about the opportunity to be in a room with people, because we've developed lots of skills and experiences around engaging online, and I think that offers so much, because it can be really inclusive. It can engage people who you wouldn't normally engage. But I love being in a room with people, and especially this topic of vaccinations, which I really came with no knowledge, no preconceptions, or very, very limited preconceptions about what that was. Sometimes being in a room can really kind of embed you in the process and just really help you to understand what's going on and how people are feeling about the issue and where you need to go with it. So I love that, just the opportunity to be in a room with people and the chance to engage such a large group of young people. Was sometimes it can be really hard to access people, but this was an opportunity, because it was in a college and because we were working with classrooms, which brought their challenges, but it also brought the opportunity to be with lots of young people. So, and as you said, that was, it was over 250 young people that we worked with in the end, and I feel that just gave great depth to the outcomes and what we learned about this topic. So so that was my initial thoughts on coming to this work.
It's really interesting, thank you. I think following up on the point about preconceptions, I was thinking, so part of our approach is always to be open and curious. That's part of what makes involvement work well. But I think, if we're honest, none of us can have zero preconceptions. We always have some ideas about. I mean, for a start, we wouldn't embark on these things if we didn't have an idea about what the value might be. But we also might have some guesses about what the people we're going to work with might be like, what they might think, how they might act, and so on. So I'm really interested for both of you in terms of what you were expecting when you first started. So when you knew you were going to speak to young people about vaccinations, and how that compared to what you found when you got there.
Yeah. Just to follow up on your point, Danny, because I think, and you're right. I mean, when I say I had limited kind of what I perceived would be people's views, but I suppose I did have an expectation that actually people would already have strong views about vaccinations, especially given the COVID context. That this group of people were in school during COVID, and so were experiencing COVID vaccinations in school at that time. So I don't know about you, Stuart, but I felt that I did expect that people would have some kind of live feeling and thoughts around vaccinations, especially based on COVID. Sorry, go on.
No, definitely. I agree with you on that point. I think I had the same sort of assumptions around sort of what they might be feeling. I think what I was surprised about, and I guess I'll expand on this later, is sort of their own feelings towards, so their own experiences on getting vaccinated. So I assumed, so two parts to this. I assumed that I have an opinion on vaccinations based off that point you just raised there, Rosie, like COVID and vaccination buses that we see around. It's all over social media every time sort of winter hits or so season changes. But then I was surprised by sort of how they felt throughout the process, how they remembered. Some of it went back sort of beyond COVID, which is quite surprising and interesting for me. And I guess it was one of the benefits of being in the room with them and not being, because we had to sometimes, it's not the most interesting topic at whatever age, vaccinations. But when you get it, because we're in the room, because we could sense the room, we could have sort of ask more questions on top of a question, and then see how sort of the brain start to turn and thinking, oh, that's how I felt about that, and that's how I feel about vaccinations at large. But that's how I felt going through the vaccination process myself in school, at my local GP, at the pharmacy. So.
Yeah, and one of the things we talked quite a lot about, Stuart, was that especially when we first walked into a room, there was quite a lack of connection to the topic around vaccinations. And you talked about that probing and that, that we actually had to shift how we engage with people, because it was, I don't know about you, but most of the engagement I've been involved with is when you're often in a room with quite passionate people. Yes. So people have come to an engagement, workshop or focus group or whatever it is, because they use a service and they're passionate about that service, or they've got a condition that that they've had experience that they want to share. But our experience, and I know we talked a lot about this actually while we were there, was that it took quite a lot to warm people up. Yes. To actually understand their experience, because it was almost like people hadn't engaged in the experience. They were quite disconnected from their own experience of having vaccinations, and it took us quite a lot to warm people up to that, to tapping back in, tapping into an experience that I suppose in some ways hadn't stayed with them. But I think also one of the things we also talked about and laughed about a little bit was the impact on coming and doing engagement in an institutional type setting. So I mean, like a public service setting, which a college is, because it comes with its own set of rules and cultures. And for me and you being called Miss and Mister was a bit, we kind of had to, it took us back really. And it also, in an engagement position, made us feel, especially around that kind of power imbalance, that we had to quickly check ourselves about. And how do we shift that power imbalance in the room when you can't do some of the some of the usual things you might do in terms of engagement, the way you set the scene, I suppose. So the rules and the culture we had to work within, which was a really interesting experience.
Yeah, and I completely agree, Rosie, there. And I guess just to for our viewers and listeners, just to sort of wrap it up a bit, it's all of the work that Rosie has just mentioned there. So the legwork around warming people up, around asking the right questions, around recognizing that in whatever setting you're going to do engagement, there are certain rules that are within that space, and you have to pull down this sort of the hierarchy or challenge any power imbalance. The outcome of that for us was we then got young people who felt comfortable to talk about the experience, who tapped into experiences they had years ago, but then also looked into the future. So helped us to design and suggest recommendations on wider engagement and engagement around vaccinations, on engagement within schools, within communities, wherever you might be able to sort of work with young people, just allowing them to have that space to talk, to be curious and thoughtful about their experiences. So all of the ingredients Rosie mentioned, which sometimes can feel quite scary when you're going into engagement, the outcome of that is sort of really rich and meaningful conversations.
Thank you both. That's really interesting. It makes me think about the type of engagement that Rosie was describing, where people turn up with lots of stories ready. It's a lot easier on a facilitator, and you can get away with things like surveys in those contexts because everything's ready. You just have to give someone some space and it's there to come out. Whereas in this work, for example, if it's decided instead of you two going into classrooms, just send people a survey, it feels like we could well have just got nothing back because those stories weren't ready to come out.
Yeah. No, dead right.
So following on from that, I'm wondering if there were other sort of challenges or if that felt challenging as part of the work and things that came up and what you did about it.
Yeah. So Rosie, the point you raised around us being called Mr. and Miss, it's not something that we've experienced while I was facilitating outside of this setting. I think so. We had 2 hours to engage this group of young people, and within those 2 hours, we had to sort of pull down or address that hierarchy or the power imbalance, build trust, get people warmed up, and get the students from a point of sort of who are used to potentially being told and not sort of potentially leading on a session. So we had the questions, but then they fed into what we were sort of taking down. So we became potential not takers and facilitators within the conversation. So addressing that within 2 hours was quite challenging for myself, but I think so the best way, and we addressed that, so Rose and myself, acknowledging that we only had 2 hours was so the starting point, but then also the ways of working. So agreeing and being transparent with the students on why we were there, what we were hoping to achieve, and how we would work together. So as things like listening with respect, and that everyone in the room had sort of equal opportunities to contribute. So we were not just going to be picking, and we didn't know them that well anyway. So we really relied on them to open up to us, and we were quite transparent about that. It felt a bit almost like allowing myself to be vulnerable within that space, and sort of acknowledge that I was no expert in vaccinations. However, I've got some experience of speaking to young people, on engaging young people, and getting their voices to the spaces that they need to be, which is the ICB.
Yeah, no, and do you know, I think it's really important, I think, as a facilitator, not to be an expert and not to portray an expert, because as you said, the kind of culture of college is very much about, you have the expert standing at the front and the students take in what they've said as kind of gospel. And I think one of the things that we made really clear at the beginning, and when we talked about our kind of opener, was, you're the wisdom in the room. We're just here to help you, say what's important and what you really feel. And I think that was quite empowering for the young people, actually, because we were instantly saying, we aren't the experts, and we said that really openly. And I think that you talked about the kind of power imbalance. I mean, I think we came into the room with a plan, and we had a plan, as any good facilitator, as you have a plan about how things are going to run and what methods you're going to use. And I think within the first hour, Stuart, we went, yeah, we need to rethink our plan, because based on because the biggest challenge for me was that lack of connection to the issue. And that actually just saying to people, what do you feel about this? I mean, we set off doing some kind of world cafes, and which are great when you have a people really connected to the issue. But actually, in this case, asking those simple questions, it really, people were struggling. Yeah. So we used quite a lot of movement to get people into a different place, to address I think movement and getting people on their feet. We moved the furniture around and getting people on their feet to kind of really feel different. People can, when you use movement, people can say things without talking, which is quite powerful. So we did lots of things, one example was right in the beginning, we were kind of just trying to learn a bit about when's a good time to engage young people. So we did something around the corners of the room. What's the times of the day where you have the most energy? Is it before 9 o'clock? Is it up till 12 o'clock? Is it in the afternoon? Is it in the evening? And people move to a corner, and then it kind of gives people that people they almost have to position themselves in a, give a view without saying anything. And that gives a really good starting place to start talking. Oh, so it must be really hard. We've come in at 9 o'clock, but your energy levels are in the afternoon.
Yeah.
How when you want to engage in a debate, how would you say that people should be doing that? When should we be doing that with you? And people begin to just talk. And I think that's the hardest thing about coming with any issue, that actually just getting people to talk is the biggest challenge. And once people start talking and they warm up, you can begin to bring other things into the mix. So that warming up we talked about was really important. But we quickly adapted the methods we used as well, didn't we, Stuart? We talked in between each activity. That didn't quite work. Let's try this.
Yeah.
And I think going into each of the different colleges, we iterated the plan every time we went in, and we tried different things. And I think that was a great opportunity, really, because we learn as we went, and that by the time we went to our last college, we felt actually we've kind of got a good sense about what might work with this particular issue. So I think it's just really interesting when you when you go in with an idea and a plan, but actually, especially being in the room, and you're very live and you're very there, having to change the plan. But it's the best way.
Yeah, I was just thinking, when you mentioned about us moving the tables around, just the logistical challenge that we faced, sort of getting included onto a timetable for the students, for us to be able to engage them, because we engaged them during a school day. So this was a normal college day. We didn't set up a different day for engagement. We went in during sort of a normal college day, normal school day. So just wanted to sort of give a shout out just to say to the colleges, the admin people, the lecturers, who were sorting out the slots for us to be able to see that many students within that. So that was the challenge, and it was addressed. We were flexible as facilitators, but the students and the schools, the colleges themselves, were also quite accommodating to us, coming in, asking this question about vaccinations for an hour, 2 hours, during their lectures or during their lessons.
Yeah.
Something that just made me want to highlight for people who are with us is that Rosie and Stuart are really experienced at doing this stuff, but what that doesn't end up meaning is that we go in and we know what to do, and we can make a plan that works perfectly every time. I think it is much more about the thing that I've really appreciated about working with both of you on this, is the kind of the openness to change. So faced with a challenge, and you have lots of tools in your toolkits to approach it differently and find the way it works. But yeah, it's not, I feel like no amount of experience takes you to a place where, whichever context you're in, you land there with a perfect plan that works every time. Is much more about just kind of taking that as part of the process, not getting stumped by it, trying out different things until you find the right thing. And I know that when we continue to do this work in other places, not all the things that were the right things there. If we go to do this in a workplace or a community centre or with a different set of young people, we might find that we need more trial and error, and it'll be a different set of things. But yeah, it's just that openness to working through and finding the way that works with those people on that day.
Yeah. And that was a real pleasure, because the students really went with us on, on all of that, on things that made them feel uncomfortable, like standing up, and, as kind of, they kind of looked at us really tentatively. But once people knew that actually this is, there isn't a right or wrong, people began to feel comfortable. And I think it is about doing whatever makes people feel comfortable. To say what they want to say, because actually in this context and all kind of engagement context, there isn't a right or wrong, and that's the joy, really, that whatever you say is important, and really valid and really valued. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and that feels like a really helpful fundamental principle. It's not about having very technical facilitation processes and so on. It's just that very human. If people are comfortable, they'll share what they need to share.
Yeah, definitely.
So, in terms of working with young people in colleges, I wanted to ask you a bit more about. So at Co-Create, we do lots of different kinds of involvement with lots of different sets of people. This project was specifically around young people in colleges, and I wondered if, looking back, there were particular things that you've learned from this that were either about working with young people or about working in that college setting, but doing involvement with young people in colleges.
I think for me, to not take away, and this doesn't take away from online engagement, but I think Rosie, you touched on this earlier around the movement. So being in the room, seeing people move, and then young people participating without sort of actually saying anything. So moving to a corner, for example, if they felt they agreed to a certain extent with the point that we're making, they'll move to one corner. So I felt like that was inclusive, being able to include everyone within the room in a way that they want to be able to contribute. So not everyone felt comfortable being verbal within the room, for example. So we had option for them to write down their responses. When we went down, we had one-to-one conversations with some of the young people who were interested in sharing their ideas, but they couldn't put them on paper. And I think that's something that's maybe when engaging with young people, not just within colleges, I believe we're in whatever setting, that flexibility on providing multiple options for someone to engage. I think that's how we achieve inclusive spaces. That's how we achieve sort of engagement that has everyone's voice, even if they don't actually use their sort of verbal voice included within what we take away from. Because I was just looking back now on Rosanna, I think you put across as it helped some of the young people to get comfortable talking. But then there were some young people within that room who the lecturers had already sort of pointed out that sometimes they don't engage for whatever reason. And we gave them that opportunity to share their opinions, share their experiences without having to utter a word. I think that for me is something that I'll definitely be taking on sort of further, thinking about it in terms of also how do we bring this online? How do we take all of those jewels from what we learned in person in the room with the young people to, if we did any online engagement, how does it all sort of fit in or work together?
Yeah. No, yeah. I think it really important, Stuart, that thing about people being able to express themselves in a way that's comfortable for them. I love that you brought that up, because I think that is really important. I think I found what was the involvement with young people, and we did some work on this, Stuart, when we were in the room around that nobody in engagement, and this is my experience of engagement, but nobody suddenly comes with the right answer or the right story or the right it's the right idea. It's a process. So people often start talking about their own journeys very early on, and then that helps people think about journeys as a whole and more strategic journeys when they're inputting into, say, service redesign, things like that. But it's a real journey. And I think what we experienced in the room was very much that young people are asked their views. The spaces in places like schools and colleges, so for people to talk about their own health, so such as 𝘃HSE classes with it, but mostly people talked about things, like pregnancy and drugs and alcohol. But what we kind of learned was that how important it is for young people to really start thinking about their own health at a very early stage. And again, we did this in movement in classes about when do you think you should have you should be asked about your own health and have debates and talks about your own health in schools and colleges. And and people were talking about, you know, 8 years old, I think I might not be able to make decisions, but I want to be able to be included and start to have that voice. So for me, it felt like when we were talking to people at 16 to 18, that journey hadn't happened in such a continuous way for people. They were asked about some things, but not others. But the very thought about, actually, this is about me and my body. And so, you know, I've been thinking about this for many years. So now I'm really clear about what I think.
Yeah.
Didn't feel to be there. So for me, it was about how do we really think about that ongoing journey for young people to have a voice. And I think that's really crucial in engagement in anything, that you have to start where people were at. And for us, people were at a space where they really hadn't been asked about any of, you know, a lot of things to do with their health, but especially about vaccinations. So our journey, you know, pushing a journey, that kind of journey into a 2-hour slot was quite a challenge. So how we open up conversations much more was really it was really important. And it just kind of really struck us, didn't it, about how that how the conversation needs to happen early, and how actually the desire for young people, when we did those activities with them, they really wanted to be engaged in things a lot younger than we would have actually thought. And, you know, things like, just being asked those questions and being engaged in the topic a lot earlier.
I completely agree with that point, Rosie, that young people want to be involved. I think if a big takeaway from this and from the work as well for myself, and as anyone who was watching this was works around engagement, the young people do want to be involved. And I think it's up to us as facilitators, us as services, us as community leaders to be able to find ways to ask those questions. And like what was said there, at what point do we start asking those questions? Figure out when do we need to start asking those questions, how we ask those questions, and explaining why we're asking those questions. But what we got was, vaccination. I think I did mention it, that it's not one of the most interesting topics. But once we got going, once the warm-up was done, you could see and feel it, that they wanted to be involved. They wanted to be involved, not just about vaccinations, but even wider topics that we were not sort of in the room for. So, that was a very big takeaway.
Yeah.
For me, something I was really aware of was when we started doing this work, I did some reading around what I could find around young people and views on vaccinations, and a lot of sort of mainstream media articles. And the general picture, apart from one of the things that really struck me, was none of them had gone and spoken to young people. They just were stating things about young people. But there was a lot of talk about apathy and genuine, you know, people are getting vaccinated at lower rates because, you know, they're not interested, they're not engaging, that kind of thing. And in fact, that's such a, I feel like I hear that about young people a lot. Young people don't care about this or that. And it's a really easy conclusion to jump to. And I feel like there's an empathy that you both approach this with, which, because what one could go into that, you know, that in terms of your expectations and going in and finding actually, you know, people don't have stories ready to share straight away. You know, if you were to stop there, you could leave at that point saying, oh, you know what, we tried to talk to people about vaccinations and they didn't really say anything. They weren't that interested in it. But it's that understanding, think, well, why might they not? Maybe they're not used to being asked stuff like this. Maybe they don't feel comfortable in this environment. Maybe they don't think that their input is valid, and so they're not confident enough to share it, and so on. So it's that space to be with people. Kind of assume. I think is a fair assumption that people usually do care about things that affect them, but we just have to be with them and work out how to support people to share. And I would assume that would go for subjects well beyond vaccinations, that we might just need to have that empathy and that time together as well to really really understand what's important to people.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm aware that we're moving towards the end of our time together today. Just wanted to ask briefly about the specific question around engaging around vaccinations. So co-creates, again, we engage with people on lots of different topics. And was there anything, if you had to kind of take away a piece of learning about engaging specifically around vaccinations, is there anything that you could share with us
For
there?
me, it was sort of, I left with an appreciation that sort of vaccinations are not a one-off event, but they're part of accessing healthcare. So if someone is going to reflect on the experiences of accessing healthcare, vaccinations are part of that. So I think when we previously, prior to going into this project or going to this work, I had vaccinations as sort of on a tangent compared to sort of accessing healthcare. I had, and I've got lived experience of accessing services myself, but I never thought of vaccinations or my experiences of getting vaccinated as part of the wider picture. But then when we talk to the young people, you could hear that experiences, negative or positive, about vaccinations influence how they felt about accessing services, engaging services again. So what other part of the health or mental health, physical or mental health sort of services that are available. So vaccination is definitely a big part of healthcare or accessing healthcare for the people who are receiving them.
Mm. And for me, Danny, I think what I really learned was that, not really learned, but actually it really struck me that the engaging people beyond just asking what's important to them in the solutions, because out of this project we came up with solutions that we, in the beginning, I think that the idea, was actually people might want vaccination adverts to be on TikTok or in different spaces in different ways, but actually the solutions that came up from the young people were things that we'd never considered. The areas such as consent and anxiety, which were big issues for people, and the design development of the toolkit were the things that were important to people, were things that actually could easily be put in place. They were the softer side of, okay, so if it isn't easy to change where we vaccinate young people, such as schools, actually what we can do is focus on, how do we support people with anxiety? How do we make sure that we gain young people's consent? How do we give people space when they're, when they're upset and they don't want to be queuing in a big venue? So for me, that, how you go from finding out what's important to developing and designing solutions with people, the surprises, but how pragmatic they were, actually, how, the solutions were so pragmatic that I kind of came away feeling like, actually, if everybody used, if people used the toolkit to really engage their own populations, they could really shift things for young people, their experiences and the future decisions they make around vaccinations. And so that I think that process was, just really struck me about how magical it is, actually, when you really support people to join in and develop solutions that actually aren't massive asks. They're just really, pragmatic, simple things.
Great, thank you. So I have one final question for both of you. So if people who are with us today want to explore doing something like this in their own area, what would you say is the one thing that they should focus on first?
I think trusting the opinions of the young people that they're working with. So focus on trust.
Yeah, no, and I completely agree. And I think, as you said, Stuart, actually involving the young people in the whatever you're doing right at the start. And I'm sorry, but I just got to plug the toolkit, because the toolkit is a brilliant start to begin conversations with young people and to help you know, help get people involved around, actually, these are the things that other young people said were important. Are these important to you? Are they, you know, are there other things? What is this presently how it works in our school or college? So just yeah, and especially I think it's a really good, the toolkit's a really good place for, you know, having confidence in coming to these conversations. If you don't feel like you have those you know, facilitative tools in your toolkit, using something like the toolkit would be a great way to ease into those conversations with young people.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm just going to round up. So thank you so much for everyone for being with us today. Thank you to Stuart and Rosie. It's been brilliant to hear about your experiences, your reflections, your thoughts. So if anything we've talked about today has sparked ideas for your own work, whether that's with young people, work around vaccinations, work around public health, we'd love to hear from you. So you can connect with us on LinkedIn. You can go to our website. There's a link at the bottom of this page. It's weareco-create.com, and just wait some time to have a chat, and we'll see how we can do things together. But for now, thank you again, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.